good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Unlock Show. I'm your host, Tracy Wilson, and today, boy, oh boy, I've got a bit of a treat for you guys, something a little bit outside of the box. We normally talk loads and loads of things entrepreneurial, but today I've got an amazing guest with me, and I think you're going to be intrigued by what he's got to say and what he's got to add to this conversation. Today, I've asked Keith Schoonover to be on the show with me today, and I want to make sure that I actually pronounced his name correctly because, you know, he said he was Dutch, and I wanted to make sure that I actually got that pronunciation correct. So I'm hoping I did. And while I'm doing that, my chair is like, let's make sure we lift that back up. Oh, I just shrunk. So I wanted to make sure I got his name correct. But good morning to everybody. You guys know the drill. So right now we are streaming live across multiple different channels across Facebook and YouTube. Now, the great thing about that is the fact that we are live, and this morning you can actually have a full-on conversation with us as we are having this conversation live. So if you want to join in today's conversation and you want to ask either myself or Keith some questions about this particular topic, about how do you actually create yourself into a much better speaker? How do you tell stories in a way that are engaging and actually going to get people to take some form of action? So the topic of today is how to improve your story through better public speaking. I'm going to tell you that right now, Keith is, he actually works for a defense business. So he's an engineer. He's an engineering director for configuration management at BAE Systems, which is a combat. He basically designs combat mission systems. So he's got an extremely important role working for the American, Defense Force, making sure that they have all the right systems for combat. Now that would require somebody to have an exceptional amount of communication skill, because I can only imagine if you got something wrong in that space, something is going to go seriously wrong. So who better to talk about communication and also being able to tell stories through better public speaking? The other thing I said to Keith before we started the show was, it's really, most people would think, hey, I need better public speaking skills. If I'm an entrepreneur, it kind of makes total sense that I would need to know how to speak in public. But in the Defense Force, being an engineer, why would you have gone down the path of learning how to have a better level of public speaking and storytelling? What the heck has that got to do with combat mission systems? Well, we're about to learn about all of that today. So if you're joining us for the first time, I would recommend that you listen up really carefully to what he's got to talk about, because in the industry that he is in, communication is paramount. Without it, it is a life or death situation. So nobody better to talk about this particular subject matter. So welcome to the show, Keith. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. So let's kind of dive into this, and let's kind of give everybody a bit of a background on you. So tell us more about your role, and how is it that you've come to be, even though you're an engineering director for combat mission systems, how is it that you have come to also be an expert on public speaking and are able to talk about that with a level of confidence and experience today?
So I've actually had a good deal of public speaking exposure through the Toastmasters organization, Toastmasters International, kind of world public speaking system of clubs. So Toastmasters Internationals, their tagline is where leaders are made. And Toastmasters as an organization tries to teach communication skills and leadership skills to everyone. And the way that they do that is through the heavy lifting of the more than 16,000 clubs that Toastmasters International sponsors. And I'm a member of a club currently. I've been a member of other clubs throughout my career. And it's really where the club environment is where you really learn through the heavy lifting of the club, supportive and positive learning experience about public speaking and learning how to grow as a professional and a public speaker.
So with that being said, given your position that you have, why did you say, obviously you had to make a conscious decision that, hey, I need to go and I need to improve my skill in this area, and therefore I'm going to join a club such as Toastmasters. Why was that such an important thing for you to do in the career that you had?
One of the things that takes place in most any professional environment is that at the beginning of your career, there are more hard skills involved, technical skills, in my case, engineering, but it's the same whether you're in a business setting, an entrepreneur. The technical skills are really dominant early in one's career, but later on, those soft skills become more important. And those soft skills are largely grounded by one's ability to speak with colleagues. And those colleagues aren't always fellow engineers. Sometimes they're in program management or finance, manufacturing, supply chain, quality. And in order to communicate effectively with those colleagues, one needs to learn how to speak in a way that you can translate those technical topics into a form that a layperson can understand them. And so when we nurture our engineers through the first half of their career, those technical skills really dominate. But as they hit mid-career and later into their more senior years in their career, it really ends up being those soft skills, including public speaking, that dominate whether they succeed or don't in their professional careers.
And that is, it's really interesting. We're talking about that from a perspective of being inside of being an employee inside of an organization. However, that is still the case, even if you are an entrepreneur and in business in your own right. Like as the same applies, right? So we start out, we're learning a lot of the technical skills, how to run a business, how to do the said thing that you are going to be the expert in. And then as you progress and as you continue to grow your business, grow your technical skills, soon there's the shift that happens where we're required now. You've learned a lot of the technical things. You've learned how to engineer. Now you need to learn how do I communicate that information in such a way that I can get buy-in from my stakeholders, in your case, or in the entrepreneurial space, is buy-in and exposure to an audience that I need to accept the message or buy into the message that I am delivering today. So there is an absolute correlation there. So in terms of like their storytelling piece, because this is the intriguing part, right? So this is very, very, it's being spoken about a lot in the entrepreneurial space these days. It's like one's ability to be able to tell relevant stories to ensure that your message is going to be able to be heard, received, and implemented somewhat by the audience, who may not necessarily be as technically skilled as you are. And you put it in the terms of, I've got to take that engineering knowledge and be able to put it in a way that a layman who doesn't understand my technical jargon would actually understand. How important has that become? And how have you implemented that into your current career?
In my career, I would say that the computer tool that I use more than any other is WebEx. And that's followed fairly closely behind by PowerPoint. So I've kind of gotten out of the business of those hard engineering tools into a place where I need to communicate my ideas and influence the organization to go in a particular direction. And it's all about communications. I think that we have lots of people who understand the engineering concepts and can come up with those solutions. Those become a lot more powerful when the broader audience understands what the meaning behind those technical principles is and what it means to the warfighter or the taxpayer or the boardroom for the company. Those are all important stakeholders to us, and for them to understand what we're doing requires a conversion of those technical parameters into something that can be digested by everyone.
So in that case, like whether you're, again, the viewers today, some are working for other people, so this is very relevant for them in their career. But you've mentioned a little bit, and there's also entrepreneurial people that listen to the show too. You mentioned that as you progress, there is this shift that needs to take place from like doing the technical stuff to that soft skill. And you mentioned that those that adapt to this, and you're alluding to this, those that adapt to this well often see their career continually progress. And in that case, in your experience, what sort of things, like when we talk about storytelling or our ability to be able to influence someone's decision, whether it be a stakeholder or it be a customer or a prospective customer for that matter, what are some of the fundamental things that one would need to learn to be able to create a story through public speaking that is compelling, that motivates somebody to take an action? What are some of the core things that they would need to implement or infuse into their storytelling?
So in terms of, and you've had other guests talk about storytelling. One of your guests had like a little recipe for how the story would be told. I thought that was great. And I'd like to spend maybe a little bit of time on the mechanics, because I think a fewer of your other guests will go there. And so to put together good public speaking, it starts with the voice, the delivery, the nonverbal communication, the pauses, the emphasis, the volume, the pitch, the rate, the articulation, the pronunciation of words. If the speaker can get those right, the message sounds so much better. Body language is important too. That's a little bit trickier in the environment we're in, where we're all on WebEx and Zoom calls. But in terms of body language, eye contact, facial expressions, gesture, your posture, and moving with intent are all important. If your movements seem to make sense with the message that you're conveying, you will be a better public speaker. If you're just bouncing back and forth in your chair, then you appear nervous and your speech won't be as effective. So voice and body language, I think, are the first two things in terms of the mechanics people think about. One of your prior guests talked about the organization of a speech. That's important too. You have to have an attention getter to pull your audience in. You need to introduce the topic and then move through your pitch in a well-ordered manner. Public speaking, especially in a business environment, whether it's in a corporate setting like I have, or the entrepreneurs that are part of your audience, it's no time for flashbacks and flash forwards and flash sideways to another continent. It's really about putting together a well-ordered message and getting it out there. And then another, pardon me.
I just wanted to say there, Keith, I love the fact that you've actually mentioned this, because interestingly enough, in one of our coaching programs, I was talking about this exact thing yesterday in terms of like bringing your speed of your voice, your tone of your voice, those pauses that you have, even the gestures, the eye contact. And even though, interestingly enough, you're saying sometimes it's really difficult for us to do that, and we're in this adaptation mode of, we're very used to, if you're in the public speaking space, to be on a stage and seeing an audience in an auditorium in front of you, and you can kind of pick up the cues from the audience. You can feel, is my message actually grabbing? In an environment like this, a lot of people can find this a little bit daunting, because you don't get that same level of, like, you're not getting that same level of feedback. So interestingly enough, this is so important, and I believe that you can, that ability to be able to bring that sense of energy and enthusiasm to an online space is the same if you learn some really fundamental things. And you mentioned these are like that eye contact, like looking down and I've talked about some of these things in previous shows, but looking down the barrel of the camera, using hand gestures, sitting up in your chair, moving forward, like you can use this sort of stuff to engage and pull an audience in a similar manner that you would on a stage, but you're using this becomes the stage, and where you would, on a stage where you're moving, center point to right and left of stage to try and, get a particular point across, you're using the camera in exactly this, in a very similar way. But I love the fact that you talked about, the mechanics of this, of what you're talking about, because it becomes extremely important when you're doing this type of, if you're doing a show, particularly if you're doing a solo show, because that mechanics becomes extremely important. The structure, the pace, the content, the articulation, the pronunciation of different words, all of those things become extremely important. So I love that you're talking about that.
And once you get those basics down with the voice and the body language, then it's time to turn towards persuasion, ethos, logos, pathos, getting the persuasive argument in place, and having good language skills helps a great deal. And then in a business setting, I think it's expected that there will be slides and other visual aids that will support the messaging that goes along. We don't read slides typically, but we do speak to them, and they're a part of the messaging that goes along with good public speaking.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that is also an important point. We've been in in an age where it was like death by PowerPoint is one of the terms that I have heard in the past, right? Where it's like you're just going to put everything you possibly can. Your entire speech is going to be on that PowerPoint. Given that we do want to use the likes of PowerPoint and some sort of presentation, or even on a screen like this, you can see that there is a scrolling banner, or, from time to time, I might have little cue cards come up. Those are all things that we can use to keep the audience engaged and keep their attention here. What are some of the tips and the pointers that you can give people about how to use their visual aids as PowerPoint, etc., to help support what they're talking about, to reinforce what they're speaking about? What sort of things should we see these days in some form of presentation?
So in terms of, who's the world subject matter expert in this area, there's a fellow by the name of Edward Tufte who's done some really good work about how to show technical content, how to show presentation materials, how to get as much content into the field of view of the audience as possible. So I would recommend reading Tufte's book set. The Visual Display of Quantitative Information is kind of his seminal work. So in my mind, that should be on everyone's reading list if you're interested in presentation materials. Within our club, Toastmasters Club, we've kind of been going on an IT journey, and I would invite your listeners to do the same, to be familiar with the various applications that are out there. I would say about 2 years ago, there had never really been even PowerPoint in our Toastmasters Club. And then we kind of, even before the lockdown, had decided we were going to go on this IT journey and dip our toes into the waters. And then we got to lockdown mode, and we've really come a long way, where at the last meeting we had half of our guests live and half of our guests visual on Zoom, multiple people presenting in PowerPoint. We had webcams on the smallest tripods ever made and panning the rooms and showing visuals both within Zoom and on large screens in the live room. So don't be afraid to go on the IT journey and learn the mechanics of how the technology works, because it's a part of who we are and the way that we present materials, and you have to be immersed in it in order to be good at it. I mean, we have gotten to the point in our business where it is nothing for me to call an online meeting and to bring everyone in, decide that the 15 people in the meeting need to be broken out into 3 rooms, beam them off into breakout sessions, and 10 minutes beforehand call them back and have a summary of what each group did. So there's a lot that can be done. We have good IT services available to us, and we should all make the most of them.
Couldn't agree more. And there are so many. Like, one thing I think COVID has done as a positive for a lot of people is that it's really made us be a little resourceful. And because we haven't had the I'm going to say luxury, because it is very much a luxury now. We look back and go, man, in the day when we were able to do all of those things, the luxury of being able to pull people together in a room, have somebody sit right next to you and be able to communicate in all of the, the same way that we used to be able, with touch and feel and all those sorts of things. You can't do that now. So I think the thing that COVID has done is made us be resourceful. And how can we really tap in to the technology that is around us to enable us to recreate that same level of experience, and recognizing that there are times when bringing a team of people together, you need to get a message out, but it's not always relevant. It's not always, best for time, best for the organization to have everybody speaking about the same thing at once. So you being able to use that function of, hey, you and you go over there and you talk about the marketing side of things. You and you go over there and talk about the technicalities of it, and you and you go over there and talk about, the launch of, so you can actually you being able to do that now, enabling you to move really quickly, but also being able to pull in maybe experts and other people in your team that you wouldn't have ordinarily been able to do because of, location restrictions. So I think that's also fantastic that you've sort of twigged on, and that the organization that you've been, Toastmasters, that you've been talking about, which has traditionally been, how do I craft a message? How do I craft a speech or a talk in a way that is going to position me as an expert and an authority in that subject matter? Now infusing all of these sort of technology into the space is fantastic.
I would say, Tracy, too, that we have so many choices, and we should consider what's the right communications method for the intent of the meeting. I think live is best for introductory meetings, long events, workshops, and working sessions. And we have kind of these immersive, better than WebEx and Zoom, where it looks like the person is sitting across the table from you. And those are good for periodic meetings, and when live is preferred, but impractical, as you had suggested. And the webcam is good for smaller venues and highly distributed work, where you have good bandwidth and a discrete check-in is needed. And then you can go to WebEx when there are more routines and file sharing. Telephone, I think, is still underutilized. If I could get personnel in our business to spend less time in email and more time on the phone, I think we'd all be better off. Those synchronous forms of communication are really often far superior to chat and text, maybe kind of in between, but the email is really problematic for a lot of our business applications.
And I think you're like, even though that is something you've noticed that it's has been an internal problem, I think that is actually a common problem we're seeing even now. A few years back, when email and text messaging, that was all I'm going to say, the rage, and everybody was moving to that. But then there's been this almost a separation or an aloofness of the person trying to get that message out. And also often in that written form, the intent can be lost, or the tone of the intention of the message can also be lost and sometimes misconstrued. So I think there is definitely a big shift and almost a yearning for people to want to have that personal contact and be actually speaking like this, or speaking on a phone and actually talking to the person live. The other thing that I think that presents itself really nicely here is, you were talking about the intention, but intention being, why do I need to have this conversation? Because there's a time and a place for all types of communication. And even in the type of space that you're in, I'm sure that there would be opportunity for you now, even with you using the technology that you are, to take some of that stuff that you would do on a repetitive basis and then have that as a recording so that people can actually go back and re-listen to it. So just giving you a lot more, I suppose, scalability and leverage with your time and where your dollars are being, your business dollars are being spent.
Yeah, we do recordings. Our business, we have a little bit of intellectual property and security things to work through. So it can become a little bit more sensitive, but we have very significant record retentions policies. We record events, we post them. All of our training materials are online. We have this arrangement where engineers can see these computer applications being executed on one screen while they're doing their work on the other screen. And so we have experts in that area to prepare the materials in a way that can be posted and replayed time and time again, so that training sessions and the like can be, for us as an expense, non-recurring to the trainer at least, and then only recurring to the person that's taking in the content.
Now, I want to go down this path too, because I know you've also had a very successful sporting career in the space of volleyball, and you've been an NCAA head of the women's volleyball coach for like a number of years. I mean, even in the sporting team, there is a need for this level of communication, and even though, again, we might think, hey, well, what's public speaking got to do with that? Let's talk about, like, how do you get a team of people, whether it be a sporting team or a team of employees that you have, how do you use this public speaking skill that you have to get them to perform at their highest level?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm going to go in, I don't know if you've ever gone over the prisoner's dilemma with your audience before.
I was going to ask you about that next.
Okay.
So yeah, let's go. Yeah, tell me about.
All right, so the prisoner's dilemma, for those who aren't familiar with it, there are two criminals, and they're apprehended by the authorities, and they're guilty of a significant crime. The authorities can only convict them at the moment on a lesser charge, and so they separate these two parties, and they offer them incentives to turn in their comrades. And the way the prisoner's dilemma works is, if everyone stays quiet, there's a minimal penalty. If they turn each other in, then there's a greater penalty. And if only one turns the other in, there's kind of an intermediate penalty. So it sets up an environment where everyone is incentivized to blame someone else. And that happens in sport, and it happens in the business world. So in sport, if the hitter says, I need a better set, and if the setter says, I need a better pass, and if the passer says, we need to put up a better block, then performance goes down because people stop talking to one another, because they're afraid to reach out and talk about their shortcomings. But if you set up an arrangement where all of the same words are said, but they come out of someone else's mouth, if the passers say, we need to get a better pass, and if the setter says, the pass is fine, we need to get a better set, and the hitter says, no, the set is fine, we need to get a better hit, then everyone is empowered to share their own shortcomings and take a greater responsibility for poor performance. And you can lift all of that from sport and plop it right down into a corporate environment or a team environment, where if you have an environment where every team member is willing to accept more responsibility for poor performance than they believe internally is theirs, then everyone will cooperate and communicate in a way that opens up the business to share and expose those daily problems and solve them faster. If you get into an arrangement where organizations or individual people are pointing their fingers at others, then not only does the problem at hand not get solved, but the rapport among team members goes down, and you endure poor performance for a long time, because there's a lack of trust, and no one will want to share their problems with the rest of the team. People become stressed and defensive, and the business suffers as a result of it.
So when a business is in that particular situation, whether it's a sporting team or it's a business, what is the solution to that? How can a business owner or owners work their way out of that?
I think one of the things that need to happen is shared escalation. So if I'm a design engineer and there's a problem with manufacturing, rather than going to the design manager and saying, there's a problem with manufacturing, and then having that problem escalate up the design community and then back down the manufacturing community and cause a polluted environment, the only way for our management teams to get things straight is to say to that design engineer, as the design manager, what did the manufacturing engineer say when you talked about this problem with him or her 3 times this week? And when they say, well, I haven't actually spoken to them yet, I brought it to you first, then the manager would need to say, you don't have a problem with manufacturing yet. You might have a problem with them, but what I'd like you to do is go talk to the manufacturing engineer, come up with a joint problem statement, and bring it to me and the manufacturing manager. And most of the time, what happens is the 2 of them work it out, and they never have to come back to anyone. And that kind of shared escalation of problems, you can't just escalate up your own organizational thread. You must bring both parties together. I think that ensures that problems are handled at the lowest level in the organization possible, right? So this gets to Bill Unkin's managing management time, who's got the monkey. How do you delegate work? And the only way to do that is to force parties to collaborate at a peer-to-peer level and not have every problem make its way up to the general manager's, corner office. That's no way to run a business.
We've often also heard of that sort of terminology as like creating vertical support and vertical pressure. And when you come at things from instead of it going upwards and, like as you say, escalating things up to the highest level, and then it becomes kind of like a problem for the entire organization, actually coming at it from a vertical point of view where, if it were you and I could sort of stand aside and have a conversation about, hey, this is a challenge that we're facing right now. What is the solution? So we become solution oriented. And where it's not, then you're able to also create either that vertical support or some level of vertical pressure happens. And what you find is that if you've got something or somebody who's not maybe a cultural fit to the organization, they tend to kind of pop out and go off on their own accord anyway. So it's a great way to be able to continue the momentum of a company and of a business without necessarily having to rise everything to the top and it becoming a septic tank, so to speak.
Septic tank, and then you receive what we refer to as management help.
Yeah, exactly. And performance management is another terminology that I have heard through or have experienced, as in having to do that in my corporate life previously. So I want to come back to now, like we've talked, so the prisoner's dilemma, because I'm glad you brought that up, because I had that on my list of things to actually talk to you about, and that's a great story and analogy that you created with that. Let's go back to storytelling. So for anybody, we sort of started out talking about some of the things that we could do to improve our ability to communicate in a public type forum better through, I call it the cast process, but through the content, through your articulation, through speed, through et cetera. What are some of the other things that people can do that will really help them to structure what they are talking about in a really articulated but concise manner that is going to get the intentional outcome that they're looking for?
Okay, so there are some kind of science behind some of that. So you can go to something like Monroe's motivated sequence, where there's this kind of almost like a rubric of things that you can go to organize your speech. And Monroe's motivated sequence starts with attention. You get the attention of the audience by doing something shocking or having a dramatic statistic or some nonverbal gesture that is emphatic. And once you got your people grasped into your story, then you show them the need. What is it that they need that can be produced by the messaging that you're delivering? And then you show them how that need can be satisfied by the solutions that you are providing. And I think that is really what all of your entrepreneurship is about. And then the fourth part is about visualizing the outcome that you want, setting in the minds of your listeners what it will be like on the other side once they have implemented the solutions that you're offering them. And then the final step is action, getting your audience to not just absorb what you've been talking to them about, but to take action on it in a rather immediate way. And so if you can, Monroe's motivated sequence, get people's attention, show them that there's a need, satisfy the need, let them visualize the solution after the need is fulfilled, and motivate them to action, then that's what your messaging should be about, especially for your entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that model, because it's spot on in terms of, there might be some slightly different terminology that a lot of entrepreneurs have heard in terms of like grabbing that attention. They might have heard that as creating a hook, or, creating the need is like telling the story as to why is this important? Why should I continue to listen? So what? It's that type of scenario there, and then satisfying by your solution. So once you've got it like salting their appetite, so you've created that attention, you've identified that there is actually a need, you've salted it by saying, hey, and I've got a solution for that. Now once you've salted that need, they're thirsty, and now they want more. So they're going to continue to watch and listen and want to know more, and potentially want to take action based on what you're what you're giving them. One of the things that I've heard a lot is whenever you're speaking about giving people advice, or even in an environment like this, how much is too much information? So we talked here, you've mentioned, you want people to take action. How much information in a public speaking forum is too much?
You can get to information overload with your speech, and you can allow your speech to overwhelm your message. I think it's important that the mechanics that I talked about earlier today don't dominate what we're doing with the messaging. And so I think what speakers should try to achieve with their speech is something that the movie industry calls the willing suspension of disbelief. Mm-hmm. If you can get to the audience to an intentional avoidance of critical thinking or logic in examining something that's surreal, then you have control over the situation, and you can get your message through to them much better. When you go to a movie theater, the room is dark, the seats are unobstructed and comfortable, the screen occupies most of the viewer's field of vision, the sound comes from the perceived direction of the action, and the projectionist is hidden. All of these things are set up for the enjoyment of the viewer, and you want the same thing from your public speaking. You don't want your listeners to say, oh, there's an excellent public speaker in front of me. Look at that great hand gesture and the eye contact move from person to person. What you want the person to think is you want yourself as the speaker to disappear, and for your audience to be completely absorbed in the story itself. And in my mind, that is the ultimate achievement for public speaking. When the listener doesn't see the gestures and they don't feel the pauses in your voice, but they are lost in the story that you're telling. That is the place for the audience where you will be the most effective as a public speaker.
So it's almost you need to recreate, or you are creating an experiential experience for that person. You are transporting them into that story, into, like, you're actually allowing that through your craftsmanship, allowing them to almost take you out of the story and replace you with them. And that way they feel as though they are actually part of that. Like you're saying, you disappear and they're totally immersed and totally involved in the story in which you have told, because they then can see themselves, okay, that's me. And you then future pacing them to say, well, now based on, I've grabbed your attention, I now know that you have a need, I'm satisfying that need because I'm allowing you to see the solution, and I'm actually giving you the opportunity to step into these shoes and now imagine yourself in your future life, future paced, as having that need that you have satisfied by this solution, thus removing you from the story and replacing them in it. And like you say, you mentioned about Hollywood, and that's really what Hollywood is doing, is creating that movie theater experience where you can go, you can sit in the chair, you're totally immersed, you're hearing that sound from all directions. Maybe if you're in a 3D movie theater too, the seat might be shaking and the spiders are coming at you. You know, all of us have been, most of you have probably been to one of those sort of 3D movie theaters, but that's essentially what you're doing. So you're likening your measurement of, have I done a great job with this conversation or this speech and public presentation that I've done, by allowing the audience member to immerse themselves in that story.
And so those professionals in the movie industry, they are the best. They're the best. So we should take our cues from them. And it can be done with the storytelling. One of your recent podcasts, you talked about the lemon and cutting the lemon, and the juices are flowing. And if you can tell the story with that kind of detail and get the audience to pucker, then you've made the right impression on them. And if you can translate that, your messaging, into that kind of detail and that kind of vivid response from your listeners, then you'll be more effective as a public speaker.
Thank you for listening to that, because to that particular episode, because that was, in that moment we were demonstrating how if your use of very descriptive, storytelling, and allowing that person to transport themselves into having that juicy lemon in their hand, cutting it open, putting it in their mouth, and then just experiencing, even though, I could just reach into my fruit bowl over there and grab a lemon, but even though I don't have a lemon in my hand and I'm not cutting it open and I'm not putting it in my mouth right now, but actually your brain doesn't really know that. Like if you're playing that movie over in your head and you are immersing yourself into that moment, your brain thinks that's exactly what happens. So you're like, that demonstration is a proof of that, because your mouth is going to fill with saliva. You're going to experience all the things that you naturally would if you put a big fat juicy lemon in your mouth and were, doing that, oh, that's sour. That is exactly what would happen.
And we need, as public speakers, to be better than they are in the movie business, because they have better control over the environment. Right? You walk into a movie theater, they own the arrangement that's there. You don't really have that. You meet someone in the elevator, you can't dim the lights. You're stuck with whatever environment you have, and whether that's in a business setting or in an elevator or at a lectern, you don't have as much control over the environment. So you've got to make it happen with the story itself. The story has to be better because the environment isn't as well controlled.
Great points. We could talk about this. Is such a really good topic, and I think it's one of those things. When you master that craft, your level of influence and authority, I mean, there's a correlation with this, right? So, and you mentioned this right in the opening conversation that we started having. You mentioned that that turning point in one's career where you move from the technical skills to that soft skill, and the one soft skill that we can really, is really, I want to say, beneficial to your success long term is your ability to be able to communicate in a way that actually gets people to take action. And when you can do that, when you can speak from a point of view where you're compelling, that you've increased your level of influence and authority, then that audience is going to continue to follow you and want to know more about what it is that you do. And eventually that then turns in to them wanting to do more business with you. Right. And like I've mentioned in other episodes, it's that the fundamental piece that comes with that then is like connecting what you're talking about with what you actually offer as a service is a really important point, because if you don't do that and you're speaking really fantastic things, but it doesn't relate to the product or the service that you have, then that ultimate success in your business just won't take place, because you've got a disconnect there.
And as important as it is, we don't always think about it as being so important. And there aren't always as many training opportunities to exercise those skills. So we needn't be afraid of public speaking. It is a skill like anything else. You might have an inherent capability for public speaking, but wherever your starting point is, you can improve your public speaking skills. There are forums to do that. It can be learned. You can improve, and that will help you in your business.
Thank you so much. Well, look, Keith, it's been a fantastic conversation that we've had today. I've enjoyed it very much, and your expertise in this area it's obvious that you've spent a lot of time really perfecting and becoming an expert in this field. And I'm sure that the organization that you work for is obviously, bearing the fruits of your dedication to improving your ability to be able to speak, because that will have a direct impact to that bottom line, to that business, as it will to any other entrepreneur who decides that they're going to improve their ability to be able to speak and their ability to tell stories. So I've got a couple of questions that have actually been coming through here. So one is, I've got some questions. What were those books? So someone's saying, can somebody just message and let us know what the names of those books were again, please?
Sure. So in terms of presentation materials, Edward Tufte, the visual display of quantitative information, is his seminal work. It's an outstanding read. It's very good. Second, I think I mentioned Bill Unkin's Managing Management Time. So he has two. He has a text, Managing Management Time, and then he has a fantastic Harvard Business Review called Management Time, Who's Got the Monkey Now? And that is all about delegation and not having the leadership within an organization steal all the work from the individual contributors. So that's excellent for delegation. Monroe's Motivating Sequence, it's not really a book so much as something that you can just, with your search tool, find out about and read about. And were there others?
I think that was it.
You
mentioned that one, and I was going to ask you about the Monroes. So that's more of a framework or a methodology.
Yeah, so that can be looked up, and of course people can look up The Prisoner's Dilemma. And I think when people study The Prisoner's Dilemma, it's pretty obvious how that moves from the situation that started with the Rand Corporation, and pick that up and lift that into your entrepreneurial environment pretty easily.
Perfect. Well, I hope that has answered those questions. So we had some viewers saying, "Hey, what were those books?" Well, there you go, guys. And I can see that one of our team is also popping them into the comment section. So if you want direct links, then watch the full episode of the show on replay, and in the comment section there will also be links to all of those books. Now, before we dial out today, Keith, if somebody wanted to follow you more, where's the best place for them to do that? Do you have any social handles or a website or anything like that you would like people to follow you on?
They could try to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's my
there you go, guys. Go
preferred.
Find Keith Schoonover on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And you can follow what he's up to. And what we've got here, it's all about looks, money, status, and height. Okay, I've got somebody that's just messaging us on also on YouTube. So also, I want to let everybody know that the Unlock Show is a live show. So we have guests on Wednesdays, and on Friday I have a solo show that I do on Fridays. So always 10 a.m. Brisbane, Australia time. So you can tune in on Facebook, also on YouTube, and you can participate in the conversations. So if you go to Business, Family and Life, Success Secrets for Business, Family and Life on Facebook, you can join our private Facebook group. You're welcome there, and you'll actually see all the promotions and all the speakers that are coming up for various different shows that we run on that particular channel. So you won't just see the Unlock Show on there, you'll see about 5 or 6 different shows being run on that channel with all sorts of different topics that are going to help you thrive in your business, your family, and life. So that being said, I want to thank everybody so much for being here today. It's an absolute privilege to be here, and I appreciate everybody's attendance. And I want to say thank you very much for Keith for sharing his expertise and his knowledge today so openly. He's been a fantastic guest, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
All right, guys, we'll have a fantastic weekend. And like I said, I'll be back again with another episode of Unlocked on Friday, 10 a.m. Brisbane time. So for now, go away, do what you got to do to live your life unlocked, because as you know, there is just no other way. See you guys.